Good afternoon. Uh, Today, actually, we are having a recorded session. I'm not online, but having a recorded session, uh, considering some, factors which are beyond our control. Now, you all are aware that now we are facing uh, a new threat right now with this, a new wave of the coronavirus pandemic. So in that case, most of the things that we have to, reformulate in terms of our teaching, exam plans, and all that. So I'm thinking of having a kind of a recording session today. One reason is this, rescheduling of our time frames, and also we were planning to finish our lecture sessions by this week, and to facilitate that, I'm having a kind of a recorded session. And last week, I shared a handout on payment systems, and I told you to basically go through this handout and do some your own reference or kind of an homework to get some understanding about these payment systems and all. And to facilitate that, I have uploaded another handout today, basically on a kind of a short note for you to refer, and that will be a kind of a easy reference for you to uh, understand the payment systems. So apart from that, payment systems, as I said, I have covered in my sessions time to time, but this exclusive session on the payment systems will not be conducted as a full session. That's up to you to look at those materials. Today, we are basically having the final session in this online course, basically, that is financial system stability and safety nets. So let me take you through these slides during next 2 hours on the payment system, on the financial system stability and related stuff. So this is our handout for the day: financial system stability and safety net mechanism. This is actually one of the key pillars in the financial system. If you go back to the week one and look back, we position the financial sector or the financial system with some important elements. So among these elements, we realize the financial system is basically composed of the monetary system and the central bank, which means money. And then we looked at financial uh, institutions, then financial markets, financial instruments, financial infrastructure, and then finally financial system stability and safety nets. So these safety nets and stability actually came into limelight or spotlight during last 10 years, mainly because of this impact of the global financial crisis and the reasons for the crisis, or the sources of the crisis, taught us some lessons to be vigilant on the financial system stability, and also to formulate some of the safety net mechanisms. So in this session, we will basically discuss those safety net mechanisms and the financial system stability. To begin with, let's first try to understand what is financial system stability. Now, financial system, as you are aware, it's a combination of elements, including the monetary system, including institutions, products, markets, etc. So if you take all elements together, that forms the financial system. We have seen in our first few sessions that the financial system is a kind of a backbone of the economy or the real sector. So the real sector transactions and real sector activities are basically facilitated by the financial system. In if you observe any collapse or any vulnerability in the financial system, which means some instability in the financial system, that is affecting the broader economy. So which means the economic activities will be hampered or affected by the financial instability. So as a result, policymakers, especially the central bankers and financial sector regulators, they are much concerned about the financial system stability. What do you mean by system stability? That is a safe and secure financial system which is able to withstand external and internal shocks. So shocks are basically emanating due to various reasons, maybe external reasons like global economic impact, maybe global asset price or any commodity price volatility, oil price shocks. Likewise, there are some external shocks coming to the financial system. Internally also there could be shocks to the financial system in terms of low economic growth, in terms of let's say collapse in certain financial institutions, or maybe some other crisis situations. Those are internal shocks. So if the financial system is stable, or it is able to withstand these external and internal shocks without any issue, or demonstrating some resilience and safety, that financial system can be considered as a stable financial system. So in simple terms, financial system stability indicates the resilience of the financial system to face shocks. The resilience. That does not mean that there are no shocks. There could be shocks. But even in the case of the shocks, the financial system is stable enough or resilient. For example, take a kind of a tree that is facing the fast or severe wind. So if the tree is if the tree continues to remain stable without falling, even with the heavy winds, rains and all that, we may say the tree is stable, that faces the shock but does not collapse. Similarly, if you observe, there are shocks in the economy, in the financial system, but the system does not collapse. So which means it is stable. It can withstand the shock. Why do we need a stable financial system? Because in the financial system mainly, the depositors, the savers are key, and investors, they are also very important. Savers, they mobilize money. Investors, they create value for money. Okay, both will be affected if there is no stable financial system. So in order to create a stable or a favorable environment for the depositors and investors, we should have a stable financial system. Then we need to have a stable financial system to encourage financial institutions and markets to function effectively. In order to encourage institutions and market to function effectively, we have to have a stable financial system. If the financial system is not stable and vulnerable, that would discourage market activities. That would discourage financial institutions taking financial transactions. So that is also effective. Broadly, to promote the investment and economic growth, you have to have investment. To promote investments, you have to have confidence in the market players. So the confidence in the market players will be reinforced or will be promoted by a stable financial system. So all in all, a stable financial system is important to have a better growth or increase economic growth, and also to create a resilient economy. So if you look at the financial stability, how do you understand it? To understand the stability, we may look at the other side of the story. We may look at the characteristics of financial instability. So when there is instability, what do you see, or what do you observe? What do you feel? A financial system is unstable when we see some financial institutions are collapsing. You call them as systemically important financial institutions. There are main or key financial institutions in the economy. Maybe banks, maybe large banks, maybe the stock market. They are considered as systemically important financial institutions. If something happens to these institutions, the system will be at risk. So failures of systemically important financial institutions is a one feature of financial instability. And also you might observe sharp volatility in asset prices. So asset prices means basically stock prices, exchange rates, share market price, share prices, as I already mentioned, other asset prices, real assets, commodities. So if you see large volatility, the prices are not, steadily increasing or steadily decreasing, huge volatility going up, recording ups and downs. So that is an indication of financial instability. Drain of market liquidity means there's no money in the market. There's no liquidity in the system. Liquidity is like, oil or grease in the financial system. So if you don't have this oil or grease, what can happen? The machinery of the financial system could be damaged. So that can be observed during the global financial crisis. So during the global financial crisis, we have seen the market liquidity went down sharply, or there was a drain in market liquidity. So when there's a drain in market liquidity, what you can observe, interest rates are going high. So interest rates are rapidly rising. So as a result, you might need to have stable or kind of a adequate amount of liquidity in the financial system. So if you don't see adequate liquidity, which means some drain in liquidity, that could damage the financial system. And also disruption to payment and settlement system. We know payment and settlement system, there are large value payment system, small value payment system, check clearing system, interbank payment systems, foreign exchange or other money transfer systems. If all these are, or at least one of these are affected, disrupted, we may call, or we may observe there is a financial instability. All above, if you see loss of confidence in the financial market by the players, for example, depositors are taking their money back, investors are winding up their investments, all this suggests what? There is no proper confidence or trust on the market. So in that case, what can happen? The financial system could be unstable. So these are some features of an unstable financial system. So we need to ensure the financial system stability. How do you ensure financial system stability? There are various aspects that we need to look at. Those are also related to the factors of the instability. So in order to ensure the stability, we have to improve, or we have to ensure that proper risk management practices are there in the financial institutions. We know financial institutions or the financial markets play a face a lot of risk. That could be market risk, operational risk, any other credit risk, any of these risks. There are various types of risks. All these risks are affecting the financial institutions or the banks. So if you have a proper risk mitigation or control measures, that will help to ensure financial system stability. You should have proper regulation and supervision of the institutions. Financial institutions are the most regulated or supervised institutions because of their unique feature, because they do business on other people's money. So in that case, regulators or supervisors, they are putting measures to ensure the financial system stability. Of course, you have to have financial sector reforms. A good financial system, a stable financial system, witness reforms time to time, which means time to time you need to introduce some changes depending on the developments in the economy, developments in the uh, financial market, developments in the global financial system. Depending on all these developments, you have to introduce certain reforms. Reforms are the way to proceed. I think most of the economies, financial systems, even in institutions are lagging behind because you don't have proper or timely reforms. So in that case, you need to have a proper reform strategy to ensure the financial system stability. Good governance is needed. Good governance means basically best practices in managing and running a financial institutions. So these practices are applicable mainly to the management of the firm. So those managers should have better governance in terms of their behavior, in terms of their interest of the company, in terms of their linkages between the other companies or the sectors. All these are really needed. And also you have to have proper crisis management policies. Now all the first activities or the points I have mentioned here uh, uh, applicable to the normal period. So during a normal period, those things are really important. But in the face of a crisis, you might have to have some additional measures. You might have to have some measures that can be used to ensure the overall strength and the stability of the financial system. So for that matter, you need to have some crisis management policies. Crisis management policies. Those crisis management policies, you can call them as safety net mechanisms and contingency plans. Those are very valuable, especially when you face a risk, when you face a crisis situation. If there are safety nets, if there are some plans, contingency plans that would ensure that your financial system is stable. Otherwise, what will happen? Any vulnerability in one sector could be translated to other sectors. You call it spillover effect. And due to the spillover, the financial system stability could be affected. So as a result, you need to have a good crisis management uh, policy. Then the next term I would like to introduce here, financial crisis. Now, up to now, we talk about financial stability or instability. What do you mean by crisis? Financial instability could lead to a crisis. So, I would say the worst outcome of an unstable financial system is a crisis. So, in a crisis, what will happen? You will see financial assets are losing their value rapidly and largely. How do you identify a crisis or define? It's a situation that financial assets suddenly lose large part of their value, nominal value. So if you look at this chart, the curve here, this is Dow Jones Industrial Average, which means the stock exchange, stock index in the US stock exchange. So what you can see in 2007-8 period from here to here, what you will see, there is a large drop in the stock price index. Large drop means there is a large value erosion. For example, if you were at this point, maybe you were having higher valuation to your portfolio, higher value. But if share prices go down, prices collapse, now you are here, which means your valuation is now less. So your wealth is eroded. So financial crisis could lead to erode wealth suddenly. So I have given you some, textbook type definition here. A financial crisis occurs when information flows in financial markets experience a particularly large disruption, with the result that financial frictions increase sharply and financial markets stop functioning. That is very important. So in a crisis, the financial institutions and the markets would stop functioning. Then the economic activities will also collapse. So all in all, what I want to say here, a financial instability, if you do not take precautionary actions, if you do not manage well, that could lead to a financial crisis, which is very costly. A financial crisis is really a costly incident. If you have some idea, if you had gone through the developments in the global financial crisis, you will see during that period, a lot of countries face severe difficulties and their financial systems face large disruptions. Now let's see what are the reasons for the crisis. Financial instability is a kind of a intermediate step leading to a crisis. If you address the financial instability by addressing those factors, probably you might not lead to a crisis. But if you are leading to a crisis, obviously there are clear reasons. Clear reasons why there is some pressure for a crisis, or what are the consequences of a crisis. Now, most of the time, these consequences can also be considered as causes of the crisis. So causes and consequences basically look at the same thing. So what are these factors? First thing is leverage. Leverage is a very important concept, which means the you borrow to invest. Okay, in order to finance the investments, you borrow. After borrowing, if you enter into capital development, or you are basically borrowing for capital enhancements, maybe that is generating some return in the long term. But if you are borrowing short-term money for the purpose of investments at low rates, that could lead to leverage. So leverage, simply you can calculate. Leverage can be identified through the total debt divided by total assets. So if you take the total debt component and total asset component, if you divide the debt by asset, then you can have some idea about the leverage. And also another ratio that you use to measure leverage is debt to equity ratio, D divided by E. EOS. This means equity. E means equity. So compared to that share of equity, how much debt you have, that is an important indicator about the leverage. Why you are worried about leverage? We have seen that excessive debt, uncontrolled debt, would lead to financial system problems. Especially, financial institutions can go bankrupt due to uncontrolled debt levels, which means the high leverage. And also high credit growth. Now, we all would like to have credit growth at higher levels. So every time we go to the bank and we borrow, and without having any consequence or knowledge on the increase in the credit amount, so it doesn't matter for us. But for the whole economy, if you take that credit in common form, not in isolation, you will see high credit growth is a factor of creating uh, financial crises or bubbles. Why? Through high credit, using high credit, probably people are buying properties. So when you buy properties continuously, at some point you might be able to, you might not be able to sustain it. So high credit growth is vulnerable. Usually, high credit growth is followed by high NPLs, which means people default. So when there are large defaults, that could create a problem in the financial system. And also high credit growth, which means due to high credit, you demand more, maybe other assets. So their prices will also increase. Now, for example, the best example is when we see high credit growth in Sri Lanka, probably two markets are booming. One, the vehicle market. The other one is real estate sector. So people borrow to invest either in a car or a house, basically. So that may inflate the property prices, high credit growth. And also asset liability mismatch, which means we know assets are collected on a short-term basis, liabilities in financial institutions long-term. You generate short-term assets, but sorry, it's the other way around. You generate short-term liabilities, which means, for example, if you have a deposit, it's short-term. Okay. If you have borrowed from somewhere, mainly short-term. But your assets, they are long-term. For example, if you are a bank, if you give a loan to a customer, that loan is having a longer period than the deposit. So this longer assets and shorter liabilities would create some asset liability mismatch. So you need to have a proper mix between the assets and liability, their maturity structure, their combination, all these matter. So for example, you have large amounts of liabilities compared to assets, short-term liabilities, you are unable to resolve or pay. So that could lead to a kind of a collapse. That is also one of the important things. Regulatory failures means some financial crises have occurred due to insufficient regulation. Regulation means the authority, maybe the central bank, some other regulator, they're basically monitoring the financial institutions, what you are doing, what are your income sources, how do you have invested, what do you have, bought in terms of investment assets, how do you basically deal with your uh, clients. All these are related to regulations, so that would be uh, examined by the authorities. But if there is lack of examination or lack of supervision, lack of regulation, that could lead to financial crisis. Weak management. Weak management means in some financial institutions the management is weak. Management does not have knowledge, or they are very poor in governance in the sense they don't have proper internal controls, they don't have proper documentation, no proper succession plan, and the system institution is working based on the systems and fundamentals, nothing is available. So weak management could lead to a kind of a financial crisis if you don't have proper governance and risk management practices. So those are some of the causes or consequences of a financial crisis. Now there's one more important factor leading to a financial crisis is contagion. Contagion. I think contagion, you have some idea. Contagion means the coronavirus is contagious, which means spreading. So contagion is an important factor in the financial market, which leads to financial crisis. So financial crisis could spread from one institution to another, or one market to another market, which you call it as systemic risk. Systemic risk, or disturbance from one market to the other market. So that is contagion. So through contagion effect, you have a systemic risk. That systemic risk can lead to a collapse in the financial system. For example, let's say in the banking system, one bank is not strong, they are very weak, and that bank collapses. So when that bank collapses, what can happen? The other banks who have done transactions with that bank could also be affected. And likewise, there are linkages to other sectors. So due to those linkages, the contagion, financial crisis could happen. Okay. Now, related to this contagion, there is a paper in one of the previous papers briefly discuss the cross-border contagion with respect to 2008 financial crisis. Cross-border contagion means the spreading of the risk beyond the borders, from one country to another country, from one group of countries to other group of countries. What's happening there? There is a spillover of the shock from one sector to other sectors due to interconnectedness. For example, any shock in the real sector, let's say in the housing market, would translate to the financial sector through the interconnection between the markets and the economies. Now, in 2008, global financial crisis was erupted or triggered by the subprime crisis in the USA, and also there were some other series of events happened in the Europe and USA, but their impact was felt by other countries as well. So that's why those countries face severe shock during the crisis. Otherwise, they would not be experiencing a severe crisis, because they observed a severe crisis due to the impact of the contagion. So the contagion is one of the key reasons for the financial crisis. So that's why you see this in the exam paper as well. Now, how a financial crisis could happen? What are the steps? Now, in the textbook version, you will see a financial crisis is basically going through some stages: stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. So stage 1 is basically an initial stage. Okay, in the initial stage, you will see some deterioration of the financial assets, institutions, some prices are declining, uncertainties there, those are there. In stage 2, in this chart, the middle part, you will see the economic activity would also decline. So when economic activities decline, one of the outcomes would be banking distress. When economic activities are going down, people are unable to service their financial contracts. For example, a loan who has taken from a bank would not be able, won't be able to service it because he is facing a economic shock. So that shock will lead to a kind of a banking crisis. So banking crisis is broadly the second step. In the last step, what can happen? Even the broader economy will be affected. So in textbook version, you call it a kind of a debt deflation. Debt deflation means the unanticipated price decline in the market would lead to a decline in the economic activity. So all in all, if you take this as a whole, you will see at the initial stage, you will see some stress in the financial market. Stress on the institutions, stress on the prices, some uncertainties there. Then the stress is translated to the banking sector at the second stage. In the third stage, it will be translated into all other sectors and the broader economy. So that's how a crisis would emerge and evolve in an economy. Then there are various types of crisis. Now here what we have basically done is we have simply identified broad steps in the crisis, and based on that, or based on the nature of the crisis, we can identify some key types of financial crisis. So what are these crises? One and the most common crisis is the bank crisis. So bank crisis means a bank would suffer from a sudden rush of withdrawal by the depositors. So the depositors will rush to your bank and ask for the deposited money. You call it a bank run. In 1929, the global financial crisis erupted. One of the causes for this crisis is the deposit run, or you call it a banking run. If you Google some pictures on the crisis, you will see the banking crisis, how people have flocked in a bank. So let me check some of the pictures for you. I'm not so sure whether you can see it. I don't think it can be shared here, but just Google the banking crisis in 1929. You will see how the people have flocked into a bank, kind of a bunch of people asking their money in a particular bank. So that would lead to a crisis because people would think that particular bank is in crisis, going to be collapsed. So they would ask money, and as a result, other people would think our money, which is linked to that bank's activity, would also be in trouble. So likewise, that has some spillover effect. So the entire bank would collapse. End of the day, all the banks could be affected. Banking crisis. We have some evidence for banking crises in the past. 1930, we saw a crisis. The Latin American banking crisis is also an example. In East Asian area, we have seen some banking crisis. Global financial crisis, there you see some evidence for a banking crisis. Then speculative bubbles or speculative crisis, which means some of the assets are largely overpriced. Let's say you take an asset, real estate, so their prices are basically tripled compared to their natural intrinsic value. The price has tripled, which means overpriced. How the overpricing is happening? People speculate. Okay, this particular segment will have higher prices in the future. There will be high prospects. So people demand more assets. As a result, the prices artificially go up. That creates a bubble. That is also one type of crisis. Currency crisis means, which means that happens through the reduction or the lack of foreign currency in the foreign exchange market. So we have seen this currency crisis in East Asia in 1997. The countries were unable to pay foreign debt because of the lack of foreign currency. The foreign currency dries down or get dried in the market, so you don't have enough foreign currency for your transaction. So that could lead to a crisis. Sovereign debt crisis means a country's government or the country fails to pay their national or the sovereign debt. As you are aware, governments are borrowing not from domestically, from abroad as well. So if a government defaults domestic debt or foreign debt, you can call it a sovereign default. So sovereign defaults are very disruptive because the country's image is basically tarnished, and they will be very in a difficult position in terms of raising capital in the market, because no one will believe you. So you have defaulted, even the government debt means no one will believe you. But those are some situations that we have observed in the past. For example, in 1970s, we have seen in Argentina, there was a sovereign debt crisis. For the first time in the history, the Argentinian government defaulted their debt. And we have seen some default during the global financial crisis as well. For example, Greece, they defaulted debt during the crisis. Ultimately, all these crises would be linked and will be ended up with an economic crisis. Economic crisis means simply GDP growth is negative for at least 2 quarters or consecutive quarters. So if you are not growing at a positive rate, which means you are contracting the economy by a negative GDP growth, that indicates your economy is in trouble. So during global financial crisis period, we have seen the global, the countries, certain countries have experiencing global economic growth, negative growth, and as a result, the global growth rate also slowed down. So these are the key types of crises. I have actually, towards the end of this slide, I have given you some examples for the examples for banking crisis, speculative crisis, currency crisis, debt crisis, and economic crisis, and etc. So I really suggest you read that part. That is some additional knowledge about the crisis situations that we have observed in certain cases. Right? So here, based on these different types of crises, I have listed down the key crises in the human history, in financial history, starting from the Great Financial Crisis or the Great Depression in 1929. So if you look at this chart, 1929 was the most severe crisis, but even before that, you might observe there are some crises. For example, the Panic of 1907 means the banking crisis in the USA. During World War I, there was a crisis, and after that, we have seen Great Depression was the most severe crisis in the human history. So there were some oil shocks, stock market crash in 1970s, the Latin American debt crisis, Japanese asset price bubble, like a speculative bubble. Asian financial crisis is a kind of a currency crisis. Russian financial crisis is a currency crisis. Global financial crisis is basically a overall financial crisis. European debt crisis means kind of a debt default. All these are some of the examples for these different types of crises, and I have explained all these crises at the end of the handout. Very quickly, let's look at the global financial crisis and how it started, what was the impact and all that. Uh, as I said, in the human history, there are two major crises that we can see, financial crisis. The first one, 1930s, the Great Depression, and surrounding that, there were crisis, and then 2007-8 crisis. So based out of those two, we have picked up the latest crisis, 2007-8, because that is very recent, and we remember how it has happened. So the GFC, global financial crisis, it started in 2007-8 period, and that is the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. So between 30s and 2010, there were crisis situations, but it was not that severe. This was the most severe financial crisis. So it has caused collapsing large financial institutions like large banks. For example, the Northern Rock Bank was the first bank to collapse during the global financial crisis. Northern Rock. Then probably you may have heard the word Lehman Brothers. So Lehman Brothers was the largest investment bank in the Europe. It was collapsed. AIG, the largest insurance company in the world, the American company, it was collapsed. So a lot of financial institutions collapsed, and as a result, consumer wealth declined. The global recession was emerged. Investors, they suffered huge losses because security prices collapsed. Credit were tightened. Credit were tightened means there's no enough liquidity in the market. International trade also declined. All these contributed to the global financial crisis, and ultimately the sovereign crisis, debt crisis in the Europe. In 2010-11 period, followed by this GFC, there was a sovereign debt crisis in the USA, as in the Europe. Most of the countries now trying to recover, they have suffered during this European sovereign debt crisis alone. Now, if you look at the global financial crisis, the reasons, there were a number of reasons people point out, but all in all, what does that suggest? People have taken unnecessary risk or excessive risk. What is the excessive risk? Because interest rates were low, people have borrowed largely for investment purposes. What the US people have done, they borrowed money, cheap money from banks, and they used that money to put up not the factories, but mainly housing. So people owned 2-3 houses. So the housing market went up because the prices, people demanded more houses because of low interest, and people started building houses, and both the suppliers of housing and buyers of the housing, they access bank credit. So bank credit was very low at cheaper rates, and this led to a kind of a overvaluation of the housing sector. You call it a subprime mortgage sector, which means not the best category, not the least category, kind of a middle category, like the middle income segment in a society. This sector basically catered to them. So what they have done through various borrowings and also uh, through cheap funding, they have acquired large amounts of real estates, especially new houses. And at some point, when you see price boom, a lot of people will supply houses, but at some point, what will happen? There will be excess of housing, excess supply of housing. So when the excess supply is high, that will lead to collapse in the prices. So prices started declining at some point. Then you are unable to service your loans. because you don't have any way to sell your houses. Sorry, when you are unable to sell your houses, it was required to foreclosures. Foreclosures means you are not paying to the bank, and the bank would come and basically auction, or basically they will take over the asset. So that led to a kind of a large amount of NPLs in the housing market. That led to introducing new products like securitization. I think last week we discussed this asset-backed securities, credit default swaps, and all that. Those are some supportive instruments to promote the sector. So through the securitization, what really has happened, people took more and more risk, because the securitization process, we remember, that creates a special purpose vehicle, and the risk will be absorbed by the SPV. So when the risk is absorbed by the SPV absorbs, people would take more and more risk. That led to a very vulnerable situation. And also trading practices were not good. Adequate capital in financial institutions were not adequate. Actually, the enough capital was not there. Credit availability was there. As I said, the damage, the investor confidence. All these led what has happened. This chart summarizes by 2006 mid part, the housing market recorded the highest house price, and then it started collapsing. By 2009, housing prices had collapsed by over 30%. So there was a large decline in housing uh, prices, and as a result, people were unable to sell their houses. They were unable to pay their loans, so that led to the global financial some distress in the US subprime market. Later on, it spread to other parts of the economy, and then the broader financial market in the world. It's like coronavirus, right? It started in somewhere in December in Wuhan, in China, but end of the day, what really has happened, it has come to us. It's near our feet, right? Which means through uh, contagion and the spillover effect. So that spillover effect is one of the key reasons in the global financial crisis. What was the impact of the global financial crisis? It led to a severe economic downturn. So financial panic in the US led to a collapse in the US economy. That damages the US employment, US economic growth, and the US economy went into a deeper recession. Financial institutions were also damaged. As I said, a lot of financial institutions were collapsed. Lehman Brothers, AIG, these are giant institutions. Northern Rock Bank, those were basically collapsed and affected. And you have also observed the global stock market have collapsed during this period. So there were large losses in the securities market. For example, in the stock market, overnight the value eroded. For example, you have a certain price in the morning, end of the day that price has collapsed. So even your investment is not covered. So which means there was a large value loss. That led to a huge economic distress all over the countries, mainly in the advanced countries. So this is some kind of a snapshot of the crisis impact. There were a large number of bank failures. The global trade was collapsed. Global industry production was, collapsed. It went to negative levels. Global financial markets recorded, some downturn. If you look at this chart, equity markets, there is a sharp downturn. And also there's a large volatility in the financial market price. The last chart provides implied volatility. Implied volatility means the uncertainty in the financial market. If you look at this chart, the implied volatility has gone up during 2010 May. So which means the market was basically uncertain. So what is the overall impact? The collapse of banks, trade, industry, equity, everything will be finally reflected in the GDP growth. So during that year, GDP growth in Europe and also in advanced countries recorded a recession, negative growth. Okay, so the impact was very severe. But the authorities have responded. They didn't simply wait. The governments and the central bank responded with timely measures. So these measures we can identify in various forms. For example, if you look at this chart, a lot of countries have adopted a lot of measures, including deposit insurance, guarantees, capital injection, bad bank, uh, uh, asset taking over, nationalization, unconditional monetary policy, and all that. So a lot of countries have done a lot. If you summarize these, probably we can identify three major things, policy responses. The first thing, large fiscal stimulus were given, which means the governments have provided large fiscal stimulus. Probably you may have heard in US, Australia, and all that, or these countries, the governments interfered. They recovered or they bailed out some institutions while they are supporting the economic players by giving a certain, dole. Dole means some allowance. So that is a kind of fiscal stimulus. When the allowance is given to people, they would start demanding goods, and that would basically incentivize production. So that is one of the reasons to give fiscal stimulus. Very importantly, what we have seen during the crisis, monetary expansions. Monetary expansions means basically ultra loose monetary policy. Here you see the term unconventional monetary policy. So it is very similar to this. Monetary expansion means unconventional monetary policy. The authorities have adopted several types of unconventional monetary policies. One, they adopted quantitative easing. Quantitative easing I have discussed sometimes back, basically buying government bonds by the central bank. Credit easing, which means buying private bonds by the central bank. That was also done. And also during that period, interest rates were brought into very zero levels. So all the policy rates in countries, they were reduced closer to zero level. You call it a zero lower bound interest during the crisis. Those are some of the measures. And also, before I forget, as a monetary policy measure, a lot of countries introduced forward guidance for monetary policy. Forward guidance means the policymaker gives some signal about the future path of the policy or the interest rate. For example, he would say, for the next 3 years, we will keep interest rates low at this level. Why? To give some certainty to the financial market. Not only that, as I said, bailouts were carried out by the government. Bailout means government is, putting some money, rescuing the institution. Now, bailing out institutions is one way is nationalization. Governments use money to nationalize the bank and operated it as a government bank thereafter. That is also one model. And the other model is you infuse some capital by the government and allow the bank to operate. Both are basically using not the government money, taxpayers' money. So it's costly. Costly in the sense you have to use taxpayers' money for the purpose of supporting the institutions that are basically collapsing. That is also. So these are the key three responses: fiscal stimulus, monetary stimulus, bailouts. Those are the key areas. To finish off the discussion on crisis, as I said, during recent times, we have seen the global financial crisis as the main crisis. But apart from that, there are some other developments as well. For example, after this global financial crisis that was witnessed all over the world, including USA, we have seen some crisis in the European area as well. So you call it European debt crisis, which means the crisis emerged in the Eurozone member countries. This is basically some European states like Ireland, Portugal, Cyprus. They were adversely affected by the crisis and they defaulted their debt, government debt. For example, in 2012, the Greece government defaulted their debt, which is the largest sovereign debt default in the history. Not only that, Greece also defaulted payments to IMF. They had an IMF loan that was also basically defaulted. So that triggered the Eurozone debt crisis. Thereafter, you will see other countries also facing a similar situation. They had large amounts of debt because the governments had used large accumulation of debt to revive the economic activity, especially during the crisis. And also some countries like Greece, they were excessively spending. So excessive spending was basically supported by the debt. So when you have more debt, when it becomes unstable, you cannot hold it anymore. That leads to a crisis. So European debt crisis is one of the crises that we have seen in the past, recent past. But then again, countries responded very quickly. Third parties like the IMF and the European Central Bank, they helped Greece to recover from their debt crisis. So ultimately, the European debt crisis did not, convert into a global crisis, but still, it created some disruptions to the economy, the financial. And recently, we also observe these COVID-related developments. We know COVID-19 pandemic has caused severe disruptions to the entire globe, especially the production, trade, and exchange. All these are basically affected. Especially, we have seen the global crisis due to the COVID-19 would lead to severe economic downturn this year. So IMF is predicting something like 3% negative growth, 4.9 negative growth this year because of the impact of the crisis. So that 4.9 negative growth will affect the financial market as well, because the profits of the institutions will be lower. The transactions, the prospects, and all these things will be affected. Importantly, COVID-19 pandemic has significant impacts on the global financial markets. Soon after the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic, we have seen largest decline in the US stock indices in the month of March. I think it's March 21st. We have seen large decline in markets. And if you look at this volatility index, during 2020 period, you will see relatively volatility is higher in the financial markets. Volatility is higher means uncertainty is higher. When uncertainty is higher, people would not take any positions, and there will be disruptions to economic activities. So the financial market is severely affected in the during the coronavirus period. And for that matter, many countries, they have responded in many ways. As you are aware, a lot of countries have introduced large fiscal stimulus to face the coronavirus pandemic. A lot of countries have given tax cuts, government spending, increasing government spending and all that. A lot of countries have done, especially the advanced countries. Most of the countries, they have used this monetary policy to support the economy and the financial markets. As you are aware, a lot of countries, they have relaxed their monetary policy by cutting interest rates, cutting policy interest rates, and also injecting money to the economy. So injecting money to the economy was mainly done by central banks through their asset purchase programs. Interest rate cut is done by central banks. A lot of banks have cut their interest rates. If you look at the federal funds rate, Fed funds rate is the key global interest rate. You will see their rates have come down to a level that you have seen in the global financial crisis, which means right now their Fed funds rate is around 0.25, very low and very in comparison to the global financial crisis. And also they have said at least for the next 2 years they will not increase interest rates, which means they have given some forward guidance that they will keep interest rates low. Apart from that, a lot of regulatory concessions have been given by the authorities. In many countries, the bank supervisors, they have given concessions, some extensions to the compliance of regulation for financial institutions. If you look at the Sri Lankan case also, the central bank has given a lot of concessions to the banking institutions, non-bank institutions, leasing institutions, uh, brokers. Likewise, a lot of concessions are given in terms of regulation. So all these are meant to stabilize the financial system. When you stabilize the financial system through these measures, you will be able to support the economy. So the coronavirus pandemic period is a very good case study for us to understand how the authorities have responded to ensure the financial system stability and broader economic stability, because it's ongoing and very recent. Okay. With that, let's conclude the discussion on the crisis. Okay. So up to that point, we have basically discussed the crisis, and from that point onwards, I am planning to finish off this discussion by looking at certain uh, uh, safety net measures. Okay. Now, financial system safety net, FSSN. What do you mean by that? It's a kind of a safeguard. What is the safeguard? That is used to protect the financial system and its stakeholders. Why do you need it? To maintain the stability. The safety net, I think you can have the idea of a safety net. For example, in a circus arena, you see this safety net, right? People who's performing on the air, below them there is a net. If he or she falls, will be on the net. So likewise, in the financial system, there are safety nets to protect the financial system stakeholders and institutions without falling. In other words, with the safety nets, the financial system can operate normally without any disruption. So what are these safety nets? So here I have highlighted key safety nets. There are 4 major safety nets. bank regulation and supervision, capital funds, lend of last resort, and deposit insurance scheme. Those are the main areas. Regulation and supervision, capital, lend of last resort, deposit insurance, and liquidity support scheme. So let's look at these things quickly. Regulation means, I think you have some idea. Regulation means the authority imposes some rules and some guidelines to the financial system to operate, or to the financial institutions. Why we need regulations? We need to secure the interest of deposit holders. Without having any systemic failure, you have to safeguard the financial system. And also you impose this regulation to have some good risk management practices in the institutions and also in the markets. You also need to promote good governance, discipline, and transparency, which means you have to ensure proper disclosure is there. That purpose is served by the regulation. You need to protect the financial system by way of, avoiding unlawful activities. Money laundering. Money laundering means putting illegal money into the system. So those things have to be prevented. End of the day, you have to ensure customer safety and fairness as a social responsibility. So financial regulation is handled by the authorities. Central bank, could be the Securities Exchange Commission, could be similar institutions. They are putting up these regulations with a view to ensure these things that I have discussed. So I have taken some exam questions here for you to, for us to move forward. Now, when I say regulation, there are two types of regulations. This is one way of classifying the regulation. What are these two types? Single regulator model, multiple regulator model. So here, this is an exam question, I think from 2019. The question asks, briefly discuss the single regulator model and multiple regulator model by providing providing examples for each. Now, in a single regulatory model, there will be only one regulator for the financial system in the country. For the entire financial system, there is only one regulator. Singapore is the best example. For their financial system, there's only one regulator. All the financial institutions, markets are regulated by a single regulator. In a multiple regulatory system, there will be more than one regulator to regulate different segments of the financial system. Now, in Sri Lanka, that's the best example we have. There is a multiple regulatory mechanism, which means the central bank is regulating the banking and non-banking sector. Insurance regulator is regulating the insurance sector. Securities and Exchange Commission is regulating the capital market. So, which means a kind of a multiple regulatory model. Now, here in the second question, list institutions that fall under regulatory supervisory purview of the central bank and SEC. So in Sri Lanka, under central bank, as I said, the central bank is regulating the banks, central bank is regulating the banks, finance companies, leasing companies, primary dealers, money changers, and money brokers. Money brokers also can also be included under central bank. Not only that, the central bank is regulating the payment system. As we have discussed in previous sessions, the RTGS system, SLIP system, these payment mechanisms are regulated by the central bank. Securities and Exchange Commission is regulating stock market, stock brokers, stock dealers, rating agencies, central depository systems. All these are regulated by the SEC. So here this slide is giving you the idea, the single regulatory model where you have one regulator, and the multiple regulator model where you have more regulators. The other classification is microprudential regulation and macroprudential regulation. Microprudential regulation means regulating, supervising, and controlling the activities of individual financial institutions. Individual financial institutions. For example, banks. Bank by bank. Institution by institution, you regulate, supervise, and control using various methods. What do you have for that? You have laws, you call them as primary regulations. So laws such as the Banking Act, Business Finance Act, Finance Business Act, all these are legislations, primary regulations. Then you have directions or determinations, circulars, you call them as secondary regulations. Secondary regulations. You have various requirements. You impose capital, liquidity, loan provisioning, NPLs, all these are, some requirements you impose on certain parameters. So each individual institution has to oblige or abide, follow these regulations. So that is called as microprudential regulation. Then you have macroprudential regulation, which means you regulate the financial system as a whole, or financial regulation aiming at mitigating the risk of the financial system as a whole. So there you are not worried about individual institutions. You are worried about the broader picture, maybe a particular sector, maybe the whole banking system, maybe the whole non-bank system, or maybe the entire financial system. That is simply called as macroprudential supervision and regulation, more than the individual firms. So by doing macroprudential regulation, you are trying to minimize the systemic shocks. Systemic shocks means shocks arising in the financial system, shocks arising in a particular segment. So that is needed, that needs to be avoided in order to ensure the broader financial stability. So this became very popular after the global financial crisis. After the crisis, many countries looked at macroprudential supervision and macroprudential regulation to support the financial system stability as a whole. For that matter, there are some tools. I think I discussed this thing under monetary policy also. Regulators are using some tools. You call them as macroprudential tools. I discussed, I hope you remember, loan to value ratios, debt to income ratios. So these are imposed not to protect one institution, but to protect a certain segment in the financial system, or to protect a certain part of the financial, or as a whole. So you call them as macroprudential tools. So that is one type of financial safety nets regulation. Second one is capital funds. Capital funds are basically the money put into the business by the, maybe by the lenders as well as the equity holders. Why I am saying lenders here? Here you have debt holders, corporate debt holders. Equity, it's clear, they are basically shareholders. So both equity holders and shareholders, they infuse capital. So this capital includes the stated capital and also the reserves. Capital broadly has two components, equity and the reserves. You don't include corporate debt here, but some part of the corporate debt could be included here. For example, hybrid instruments. Debentures are considered as hybrid instruments. For example, preference shares. So they are hybrid instruments. So those can be included in these capital funds. So with regard to capital funds, in simple terms, capital funds is basically the owner's money. With regard to capital, there are some ratios or some requirements imposed by the regulators. One requirement is capital adequacy. Capital adequacy. These requirements are coming from international standards, Basel requirements, probably you may have heard. Basel requirements came into operations in late 80s. Thereafter, Basel 1, Basel 2, likewise, there are various versions of Basel Code. Now, actually, countries are adopting Basel 3. So, all these Basel requirements are targeting one important thing, capital. In Basel 1, Basel 2, Basel 3, all Basel requirements include capital and other than some other measures, right? In addition to capital adequacy, the regulator is basically considerate about the regulatory capital. Regulatory capital means basically the amount of capital that you have to operate a business, right? So this regulatory capital, as I said, can be identified through this capital adequacy through some ratios, right? So one ratio is the minimum capital ratio. So minimum capital ratio or the minimum capital requirement is measured by the amount of capital available after regulatory adjustment as a percentage of total risk-weighted assets, right? Now, in this regulatory capital, if you look at this part, there are various, items: common equity, capital convention buffer, additional tier 1 capital, total capital ratio, and all that. These are actually different forms of capital. In our case, we are not going into that detail because you are also studying commercial banking. Here, what we are trying to understand is what do you have or what is the requirement in terms of capital. So the total capital ratio is defined as total capital divided by risk-weighted asset, total risk-weighted asset. Risk-weighted assets means each and every asset is weighted against their relevant risk. For example, a loan is having a different risk, real asset is having a different risk. Based on their risk levels, the assets are computed. So if you take total capital as a share of total risk-weighted asset, you call it total capital ratio. Now, in 2017, since 2017 July, every commercial bank and LSB, means specialized bank in Sri Lanka, maintain their capital ratios at all times. You cannot go below these capital levels. So there are some ratios given by the central bank for this matter, right? Now, here I have an exam question taken from 2019 semester 2. What the question asks, a bank's total risk-weighted assets and the total capital as at this date is rupees 15,500 million and rupees 2,015 million respectively. Compute the total capital adequacy ratio. As I said, total capital adequacy ratio is simply capital divided by risk-weighted assets, multiply into 100. So in this case, 2015 divided by 15,500 into 100 means 13%. So which means bank should maintain this amount of capital. Let's say the minimum capital requirement the central bank has imposed is 12%. The bank should at least have 12% total capital ratio. But this bank is having 13%, which means they are above the minimum level. Let's say the central bank has imposed 12%. This figure comes to 10%, which means what? They are capitally inadequate or not enough capital. So they have to adhere to the regulations by bringing in capital and increasing the capital level. Okay. So you call it regulatory capital, right? Regulatory capital. Regulatory capital means total capital adequacy ratio. And related to capital, there's another measure, minimum capital. Now, this measure is applicable when the bank is in operation. Minimum capital is applicable to start a bank and also to operate the bank. Now, in Sri Lanka, the central bank has imposed these minimum capital requirements. Let's say you want to have a new bank, you want to start a new bank. What is the minimum capital you need to have? If it is a commercial bank, 20 billion. Specialized bank, 7.5 billion. Foreign bank, 10 billion. So from 2020, no one will be able to open a bank if you don't have this amount of capital. For the existing bank, the central bank has imposed some deadlines. Actually, it was imposed as 2020, but due to this coronavirus pandemic, it has increased to 2022 actually. This should be 2022, right? There's a correction. So by 2022, commercial banks, they should have 20 billion. Specialized banks, they should have 7.5 billion. Foreign banks, if they have assets up to 100 billion, they should have 5 billion capital. If they are having more than 100 billion, they should have 10.5 billion capital. So this is called as minimum capital. Minimum capital is applicable when you want to start a banking business. Regulatory capital is applicable when you run the business, you should maintain this much of capital because capital is a buffer. When you have a shock to the banking institution, to absorb that shock, you should have this buffer. So that buffer is ensured by the regulator as a safety net. Third safety net is lender of last resort. Lender of last resort means the commercial banks or the financial institutions, they can access the central bank as the last resort in the case of a imminent financial panic. In Sri Lanka, if banks are unable to mobilize funds from the market, they are under severe capital or severe liquidity stress, they can go to the central bank and ask for a loan. That loan is called lender of last resort loan. Banks are pledging any security for that matter, and they are borrowing at the bank rate. I hope you remember recently the central bank has revised this bank rate downwards in order to support the banking system if they want to access this lender of last resort. So for individual banks in a country, the central bank is the last resort. For countries, what is the last resort? IMF. So if a country has a problem in financing their, let's say, foreign debt, they can go to the IMF and ask for a loan. You call it a last resort. Final safety net mechanism is the deposit insurance and liquidity support scheme. Deposit insurance scheme is a well accepted mechanism to protect the public confidence. Now, there are two parts of this deposit insurance scheme and the liquidity support scheme. In Sri Lanka, you call it SLDILSS, Sri Lanka Deposit Insurance and Liquidity Support Scheme. What are the two parts? First thing, there's a deposit insurance. So if you are a depositor, if you have a deposit in a financial institution and the financial institution is collapsed, the regulator, the central bank, can advise the deposit insurance scheme to pay the depositors up to 600,000 per deposit. So the cumulative value will be paid. Let's say you have 3 deposits, cumulative 1 million, but you will only get up to 600,000. Now, believe me, see, this 600,000 serves for at least 90% of the deposits, because most of the depositors are small deposit holders. So their issue is addressed by the deposit insurance scheme. And who contributes to these deposit insurance schemes? Banks are contributing. Banks, they have a separate percentage to contribute. Non-banks, they have a separate percentage to contribute. I think we have an exam question. Let's look at that. So they are the contributors. If the government wants to enhance this amount, 600,000, probably the government can infuse some money to the deposit insurance scheme. Okay, but mainly it is from the contributors. And also the other part of this scheme is liquidity support scheme, which means if a bank is in a trouble, without going to the lender of last resort, they can ask for a liquidity support from this scheme. So that is support for the purpose of supporting the financial institution. So the deposit insurance scheme is supporting the depositor as well as the financial institution in the case of a difficulty. So it's basically a compensation. So here we have a question from the exam paper 2019 semester 2. This is an interesting exam question, important question actually. I have put up these 3 questions here. The first one: what are the regulatory ratios stipulated by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka to assess the financial soundness of licensed banks with regard to the following? Right? So you have to give at least 5 in combination. So the first one, capital adequacy. What are the indicators used by the central bank to assess the soundness? So in terms of capital adequacy, the central bank is using common equity tier 1 ratio. I hope you remember I mentioned it here, the common equity tier 1 ratio, right? And then tier 1 capital adequacy ratio, that is also one of the indicators. Total capital adequacy ratio, remember we calculated the risk-weighted assets, capital as a percentage of risk-weighted asset, that is one of the measures. So we can basically list out 3 capital adequacy measures. What are the liquidity related measures? In Sri Lanka, we have statutory liquid asset ratio, which means the bank should at least maintain a certain percentage of liquid assets. I think it's 20% in Sri Lanka. So that is related to liquidity as a measure of liquidity. And there are 2 other ratios, new ratios coming under Basel III, liquidity coverage ratio and net stable funding ratios. These are also used by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. In terms of leverage, there is a ratio called leverage ratio. So if you just mention these names, you get marks at the exam. So if you mention at least 5 ratios, you get 5 marks. Okay. Question 2. Specify 5 emerging increasing risk in the financial sector due to high reliance on technology. So I think we discussed this thing under risk faced by the financial institutions. What are the risks related to technology? Probably we can highlight few risks such as money laundering risk, cybersecurity risk, technology risk, and also customer due diligence risk, which means you don't know who the customer is, related to KYC, know your customer policy risk, and also terrorist financing risk. That is also one of the risks faced due to the technology. The last table is really important. This is actually related to the deposit insurance and liquidity support scheme in Sri Lanka. So part A, licensed banks reporting frequency. What is the reporting frequency? Here in A, it is quarterly. What is the reporting frequency for licensed registered finance company, which means part B? It is monthly. This is quarterly, the finance company is monthly. And here capital adequacy ratio 14% is basically applicable for licensed banks, which means they should maintain more than 14% capital. And then premium, as I said, they are contributing to this fund. What is the premium? Licensed banks, their premium is 0.1 per annum. 0.1 per annum. And for licensed finance companies, it is 0.15. So they are a little higher because considering their risk, right? This is 0.1, this is 0.5 based on their total asset base, right? Maximum compensation per depositor under per institution, right? What is the maximum compensation? This is actually maximum compensation per depositor or per institution, which means not in combination, right? It's only one. How much? 600,000 rupees. So earlier it was actually less. I think 2 years back the government enhanced this into basically 600,000. So that is some of the questions from the previous papers related to these financial system safety net. So to summarize, what are these safety nets? 4 types of safety nets in the financial system to ensure their safety. Regulation, capital funds, lend of last resort, what else? Deposit insurance schemes. So those are the 4 major areas. Last thing I want to touch upon, the credit rating. Credit rating is important in financial business because that gives some evaluation of the credit risk of a debtor. Credit risk, I hope you remember, that is basically the possibility of defaulting. So when a debtor is raising debt, or if someone wants to borrow from an institution, the rating would give you an assessment about the credit worthiness. Credit worthiness means whether this person is worth enough to give a loan, whether he will pay back. That is the idea. So it's a numerical or quantitative evaluation of the credit worthiness that is important for the investors as well as to the lenders. Investors will only invest in the securities which are rated. People or the lenders will lend money to the institutions who are basically rated. So this rating report is a kind of an assessment based on some quantitative and qualitative information. So what are the information the rating agencies would consider? Macro factors, political stability, profits, debt profile, repayment ability. That is very important. Whether this particular person or a country, institution is able to honor their debt. That is one of the key requirements. So credit rating can be applicable for an institution and also for a country, also for an instrument. Probably you may have seen the Sri Lanka sovereign rating. Sovereign rating means the country rating. You may have seen that bank is AAA rated, which means institutional rating. You may have seen that debenture is AA rated, which means instruments are rated. So country, institutions, instruments can be given this assessment. Now, usually there are different rating agencies. Most popular rating agencies are Moody's, Standard and Poor's, you call it S&P, and Fitch. They have different rating systems for securities and the companies. But in spite of the differences, all these suggest the higher value you get indicates higher rating. The lower value you get in this table indicates the lower rating. For example, if you have AAA under Moody's or S&P or Fitch, that indicates your rating is prime or super grade, highest grade. No default risk whatsoever. So there are some countries with AAA, Singapore, USA, UK, those are AAA countries. And there are some countries with lower ratings. For example, if there is a large possibility of default, they might be rated in the lowest category. Some bonds are under default category, which means you call them as junk bonds. If a bond has a D rating, you call it a junk bond. Where are we? Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka actually, earlier we were in this middle category. So earlier we were under BBB1, BB minus, things like that. But recently, as you are aware, the Moody's, they have downgraded Sri Lanka into CAA1, which means 2 notches, now downgraded by 2 notches, considering some of the weaknesses or their assessments. Now, this is actually a quantitative assessment. So one person's assessment could be different from another entity. So that is the subjective part of the rating. So all depends on their assessment and their rating metrics. But overall, in general, a rating is needed by a country, an institution, or a product to attract investors, good investors, at cheaper rates. So if you have a high rating, you pay less as the cost of money. If you have a higher rating, you have to pay a lot. For example, if Sri Lanka wants to borrow in international markets, probably we have to pay a premium. Why? Our rating is lower. Singapore does not have to pay a higher premium because their rating is high. So this is used as a benchmark to assess the credit worthiness of the institutions and countries. Okay. So after that, in this slide, I have in this slideshow, I have included examples for various crises, examples and definitions. So I have defined what is a banking crisis, what is a speculative bubble, what is a currency crisis, what is a sovereign debt default, what is a recession or economic crisis, Wall Street crash, oil crisis, Latin American debt crisis, Japanese asset price bubble, Asian financial crisis, Russian financial crisis, all are examples and some features of crisis. So that part actually I have included for you to as some added knowledge. So if you want to understand what are the dynamics of a debt crisis, I have given you some additional information. Okay. So with that, we are able to conclude our session. And with this, we will be actually completing our online course. I have basically, I think, spent something like 3.5 months with you online. And most of the time we were basically interactive, and a lot of participants in this forum. I remember some of the names. They were very good students in terms of interaction. They were answering, they were responding. At least 10 12 people were like that, but some of the people actually they were only listeners. But all, I guess, will do some hard work, and we'll go through the materials, we'll do some extra work, because this online version is not enough. In the classroom we have some various interactions. We do exam questions, we have exams, mock exams, we have workshops, we have the revisions, a lot of things. But in the online mode we are very restricted and limited. So I really recommend you do some hard work before the exam. Hopefully, let's see whether these restrictions are eased and things get better, and let's try to meet in a revision session physically at the IBSL. If not, I wish you all the best, and thank you very much for your support, and hopefully you will do best at the exam. Okay, good luck. Thank you very much. Let's stop at this point, and please go through the session I shared with you on the payment systems and settlement systems. Okay, thank you.